Blessed are you, Lord our God, for the gifts of wisdom and knowledge. Be with us today during these graduation exercises as we remember your love and your direction in our lives. Help us to appreciate the life you provide for us, and send us your Holy Spirit to be our constant guide and inspiration, you who live forever and ever. Amen. Be seated. As Chancellor of St. John's University, in the name of the sponsoring Benedictine community, St. John's Abbey, and in the name of the Board of Regents, I herewith call into session this commencement convocation at the conclusion of our 133rd year for the conferring of the academic degrees granted by the university. I request Father Hilary Timish, President of the University, to take charge of these exercises.
I'm happy to welcome all of you, the graduates, senior class of the college, graduates of the School of Theology taking their master's degrees today, all of your family and friends, including those of you who weren't able to get into this space but are watching the program on video in the Stephen B. Humphrey Auditorium or at the lower level of this church. Before we move on to the program for the day, I want to take a moment to thank the faculty and the staff of St. John's University for their dedicated and devoted work this past year, all of them educators. And I especially want to mention Mr. Raleigh Sullivan, who will be retiring from the faculty from the Myers Chair in Management, and Dr. Isla Perlmutter, now Professor Emeritus of English, who will continue to teach part-time in the coming years, we hope. I don't know whether Raleigh and Isla are. I know Isla is here. Isla, would you please stand? Each year, the senior class chooses one of its members to speak for the class. Scott LaBar is this year's speaker. He is a government major. He's graduating magna cum laude, and he's been accepted for fall enrollment at the University of Minnesota Law School. He aims at a career in public office, and if his college activities are any indication, he will have great success. He's been a member of the Student Senate and the wrestling team, both of which should be helpful. He's also been a member of the International Affairs Club and St. John's Debate Society, the Forum. As a student, he has interned with a St. Paul law firm and in the Washington office of Representative Jerry Sikorsky. Scott has been blind since the age of 9. He holds the position of first vice president of the student division of the National Federation of the Blind. On May 16th, he was at the White House as one of 3 students chosen nationally to receive from President Bush the 1990 Scholastic Achievement Award sponsored by Recording for the Blind. Scott comes from Woodbury, Minnesota. His parents, Charles and Donna Labar, and his brother Craig are here today, and they must be fairly bursting with pride. I'm happy to introduce Scott Labar.
Had to make sure they didn't goof up the pages on me here. Thank you, Father Hillary. When Chris Stiffley called to inform me that you, the senior class, had chosen me as your senior speaker, I must admit that I was overjoyed, perplexed, and terrified, all at the same instant. I asked myself, what in the world am I going to say? Well, whatever it is, I hope that years from now, when all of you graduates are incredibly wealthy, and I come to your doorstep as a poor politician, begging for your donations and votes, I hope that you'll be merciful. So, after $44,000, 1,230 class hours, 4 years of roommates, hundreds of evenings conducting field research at well-known institutions of higher social learning, many lazy afternoons in our beautiful woods and lakes, and after developing many close friendships, what have we learned? For every one of us, of course, it is something different. But I am willing to gamble that we at least have some common ground. Today is a day of great accomplishment, for we have labored long and hard to achieve something that the overwhelming majority of the world has not: a college education. From symposium to senior seminar, professor after professor has pushed us to think more deeply, write more clearly, speak more effectively, and apply all that we have learned to every new challenge. Through a liberal arts education, we now stand ready to embrace the world's challenges. No task or project should be too great for us, because we now have the tools to confront and change our society. Some of us are going on to good-paying jobs. Others will be volunteering in various service organizations. And yes, some of us are gluttons for even more punishment: graduate school. In whatever we achieve, and wherever we go, we shall be armed with the guiding light of a St. John's education. This education has opened to us the wonderful complexity of the world. We arrived seeking black and white truths. Now, however, all we can see is gray. But gray is beautiful, for in a gray world, where all is unsure and undetermined, our increased knowledge and heightened sense of wisdom can affect significant changes. In a black and white world, all remains stagnant and unchanging, making our ability to first critically analyze and then adapt totally obsolete. We have also gained a more healthy respect for the world in which we live. The 2,400 acres of beautiful woods and lakes that have been our home for these past 4 years imbued in us a deeper regard for the world's habitat. With environmental issues receiving paramount attention today, we have already gained a special understanding for the urgency behind this topic. For if we do not balance our urge to ever expand with a strong respect for nature, life as we know it shall ebb away, and the evidence that we were even here will only be a scarred memory on the Earth's lifeless face. At St. John's, we have been a part of a dynamic and loving community. Nearly every friend that has visited me here has inevitably commented on our unique and profound sense of community. I know for myself that our sense of respect for one another and our willingness to lend a helping hand to each other is what attracted me most to spend my college years behind the pine curtain. All too often, our community has gathered in grief and sorrow. During our time as students, we have fondly remembered the tragic deaths of friends and students such as David Besser, Patrick Mooney, Mark Moeller, and Andrew Morshus. We also remember the untimely deaths of recent alumni, Daniel Hotz and Tony Tates. We mourned at the passing of Fathers Alfred Deutsch, Ivan Havener, Otto Weber, and Michael Blecker. For all these friends and those who were special in our own individual lives, let us always remember them very fondly in our hearts and in our prayers. We have also celebrated the joy of living through marriages, births, and the arrival of new students, faculty, and staff to our community. Let us never forget our cherished and beloved community. I will miss all of you who have made my life here so special. So, after many years of pushing our minds to the limit, seeking new challenges, making lifelong friends, and living together in this community, how do we confront the new and scary reality which stands ready to slap us in the face? Next fall, we shall be scattered across this earth. From Anchorage to Rome, Johnnies will begin new lives. Even though we will be separated by these great distances, let us stay together in our hearts and minds. Let us remember our friendships here, but also carry our sense of community to our new friends and families. Let us remember that growth does not cease after we receive our degrees. The world is constantly changing around us, and we must grow with it. After all, change is one of the dynamic constants of nature. Let us remember that St. John's has taught us to expand and increase our worldview. Armed with our education, we stand ready to impact and shape our world in a significant way. We can indeed be part of a positive change to better our world. It is so appropriate that Ambassador Perkins joins us today. By serving as the first black U.S. ambassador to South Africa, and I believe the first black Director General of the U.S. Foreign Service, he demonstrates that there is hope for change. We too must be ambassadors of hope. With faith in ourselves and belief in hope, we can overcome our seeming insignificance and change the world in ways small and large. History, both past and recent, provides us with an abundance of examples that hope and change can conquer the most hideous and oppressive systems and maladies. First, an example near to my heart. 50 years ago, the National Federation of the Blind bloomed into its existence. At that time, blind people were relegated to almost absolute poverty and helplessness, stuffed away into institutions and hospitals, with only a very small handful making their own living. A blind man named Jacobus Tembroek believed that the blind possessed the same capacities as the sighted, and he founded the NFB to spread the belief that blind people could succeed given the chance. Today, 70% of the working-age blind are yet unemployed, but that is 30% fewer than just 50 years ago. During those dark times, a blind person could have never dreamed of going to college. But because of the work of Jacobus Tembroek and others, I stand before you today giving the most important address of my life. Another amazing example of hope and change happened only this past year. The people in Eastern Europe, in an incredibly short period of time, have overturned an old and oppressive political system. When we watched the Berlin Wall come tumbling down, I knew there was hope. Through their belief that they could change their lives, the people of Eastern Europe toppled government after government that had seemed so entrenched. And people like Lech Walesa spread. These movements did not spontaneously combust and spread like wildfire over the masses. It took a few courageous people like Jacobus Tembroek and Lech Walesa to possess a fundamental belief in change and hope for the future. We too must possess that fundamental belief. Even though we have made many great strides in many areas, there still is far too much poverty, pollution, corruption, starvation, war, and violence in this world. We simply cannot stand idly by and watch it happen. I am not advocating that all of us rush out of this church and become crusaders for absolute social justice, mindlessly smashing down and striking out against evil. None of us alone can achieve great world change. But if we all keep our minds on global ideals and work to change our local environments, we can have a profound impact on our collective worlds. While we are sitting in our comfortable offices, we must never focus solely on our own self-interest. If we keep these ideals in mind as we go about our daily tasks, we can change the world. I believe that each and every one of us has that potential. Finally, there are a great many people we need to thank for our success. To the sponsoring monastic community, we have appreciated your graciousness and hospitality. To the staff and administration, thank you so much for keeping this place running well. Our special gratitude goes to the faculty who have labored to help us learn and grow so much. Most importantly, to our families and friends, without your support, we would have never achieved this great accomplishment we celebrate today. Since my underlying theme has been hope, I wish to conclude with a quotation from Robert Kennedy. Despite the sexist language, his words offer inspiration to us all. Each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of daring and energy, these ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Let the class of 1990, no, let all of us be that mighty wave of hope that shall shatter injustice and promote hope for all.
Benedictine monasticism had its beginning in the rule of Benedict over 1,500 years ago and was a strong influence in shaping European culture with its balance of work and prayer, ordered community life, and social outreach. It remains vital in the Church today. At commencement, we like to honor persons who have exemplified Benedictine ideals in their own careers by conferring on them the Pax Christi Award. Today we honor Edward Skillen, publisher of Commonweal, a weekly magazine of commentary and opinion which, after 65 years, still has a claim to be the leading voice of lay Catholic thought in America. For many years, it was a very lonely voice, and Ed Skillen has been with it through most of those years. More of his history and Commonweal's will emerge as I read his citation. Most of us here know that in its 65 years, Commonweal magazine has helped to shape American Catholic history, the very consciousness of Catholic Americans. But that knowledge makes us exceptions. Today, as always, only a relatively small fraction of the people it has benefited even know of its existence. That's too bad in a way, but it's also all right. It's a price willingly paid by any journal of equality that takes on difficult issues, observes high standards, fights the good fight for peace and social justice, respects the intelligence of its readers, and doesn't even want the money it can't get from the Marlboro Man. What's less acceptable in the view of the St. John's community is that even among the cognoscenti of American Catholicism, a still smaller fraction appreciate the part that has been played by our honoree in sustaining and inspiring what has been called perhaps the most important symbol and achievement of the American Catholic laity. Who is responsible for this gap in our knowledge? I turn to you, Edward Simeon Skillen, and I say, j'accuse. You are a dedicated man, a prudent man, a gifted and courageous man. With all that, you are also a quiet man, an appropriate quality in a Benedictine oblate of Portsmouth Abbey. You were turned down for a job at Commonweal after you graduated from Williams College in 1925, but you persevered until you were accepted for work in the circulation department in 1933. Our founder, St. Benedict, did not have 8 years in mind when he said that the newcomer should not be easily admitted, but that his patience should be tested. Once admitted, you have certainly practiced the Benedictine virtue of stability. You've been a member of the Commonweal staff since 1933, its editor from 1938 to 1967, its publisher from 1967 till now. 5 plus 29 plus 23. Put it all together and it adds up to an incredible half-century plus 7 years in a critical, demanding, faith-testing work, a record that can have few, if any, parallels in the history of magazine journalism. Even the New Yorker's fabled William Shawn quit after a mere 53 years on the job. If we think of Commonweal as a platform or a stage, it is easy to compile an impressive roster of men and women who have performed brilliantly there and whose brilliance has earned them recognition both in the Catholic world and in the larger society. But often enough, the planks of that platform have been held together with chewing gum and sealing wax, and sometimes one suspects by prayer. It is you, Edward Skillen, who through these years have been doing the praying, the planning, and the worrying needed to keep that platform steady. And we know this not from you, but from your many colleagues, past and present, who find you an exemplar and an inspiration in both your private and your public life. We also know that in the spirit of our founder, your work has been your prayer. Serving Commonweal through these decades, you have served us all, helping us to meet our cultural, intellectual, and spiritual needs, helping us to be present to our own times. For this gift of your life, St. John's University is pleased to present to you the Pax Christi Award on this 27th day of May in the year of our Lord, 1990. Would you please stand, Ed? Our commencement speaker is Ambassador Edward J. Perkins, a career diplomat who is currently Director General of the Foreign Service and Director of Personnel at the State Department. He's a native of Louisiana, with his bachelor's degree from the University of Maryland and his master's and doctoral degrees in public administration from the University of Southern California. Prior to joining the State Department in 1972, he served in the U.S. Army from 1947 to 1950 and the Marine Corps from 1954 to 1958. Subsequently, he held senior positions with the Army and Air Force Exchange Service in Taipei and Okinawa, and then with the U.S. Agency for International Development in Washington and Bangkok. As a member of the State Department, he served in Washington, in Ghana, and in Liberia before being appointed ambassador to Liberia in 1985. In 1987, President Reagan appointed him ambassador to South Africa, a post he held for 3 years, during which he gained wide recognition for his fearless advocacy of human rights and an end to apartheid. In recognition of his distinguished service, particularly in South Africa, we confer on him today the degree of Doctor of Laws honoris causa. Sister Eva Hooker of the Congregation of the Holy Cross, Vice President for Academic Affairs, will read the citation. After conferral of the degree, Ambassador Perkins will speak. Sister Eva.
Ambassador Perkins, please rise. From the prophet Ezekiel. And I sought for a man among them that should make up the hedge and stand in the gap before me in the land. Such is the role of the diplomat. Today we honor a man who is a career statesman, having worked his way up through the Foreign Service to the rank of ambassador to Liberia and to South Africa, and since September 1989, Director General of the Foreign Service. Upon his appointment as the first black ambassador to South Africa, Mr. Perkins was described by some as having placed himself in contradiction. By the time he left the post for his current position, he had won the praise of many for the boldness with which he called for black rule in Pretoria. He wrote, "I sense a growing realization that a valid political system here must be one that correlates with the demographics of the country, not merely black participation or black cooperation, but a government which truly represents the majority of South Africans." In his writing and other public actions in Pretoria, he was witness with those who protested mass detentions of citizens, in particular children, and other forms of limiting the fundamental liberties of Pretoria's black citizens. Ambassador Edward J. Perkins has demonstrated in his career as statesman the poet Holderlin's great lyric truth, "And much as on your shoulders a burden of logs is to bear and keep." Human rights are fully kept and fully honored by remembrance, as well as political and ethical action. The words of Mangane Serote, a South African poet, celebrate a people's urgent yearning for these rights. It will be the trees, the mountains. It will be the silence of the Karoo and its heat. It will be the song of our rivers moving us one with them, moving, the night giving us sanctuaries, the day witness but silent. It will be us, steel taught to fetch freedom, and we will tell freedom. We are no more strangers now. For your own judicious and steel-taught determination to serve our nation, for helping to make the day witness to the telling of freedom in South Africa, and for keeping all of us in remembrance by standing in the gap before us in the land, St. John's University confers upon you the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa.
And the citation. And congratulations.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction and for this honor. It is indeed my high honor to be among you today, participating in this graduation exercise. occurring at what I consider to be a very historic time in our country and in the world, the entire world. Opportunities are now not just available within the narrow confines of your community, but have universal application. You've been going through a transition for most of your lives, graduates. This transition point of major importance in ordinary times, today, in my judgment, takes on even greater dimensions. Your opportunities to observe, to participate in the reordering of global institutions, of course, causes you to look at present realities. Consider this period and also think of the excesses and accomplishments of the century which is about to end. Your general peace conferences in the world, which have been done by those who represent you, as well as space travel and German unification. Your reflections would be incomplete if you fail to look at the number of untimely deaths at the hands of other humans. And you might wonder, has it all been worth it? The basic reality of your new status, that of graduates, should be cause to reflect on your entry into the next century with your colleagues from around the world. Your own vision and your empathy, your own abilities and your drive will be adumbrated somewhat by the uncertainty now of mankind's so far inability to figure out how to live together. The most important objective, it seems to me, of the 21st century is just that. Being here among you today is an occasion which calls for words of long-lasting legacy of my own. I have to tell you, I don't offer you any panaceas. For today's problems or for those forecast for tomorrow. I do, however, suggest listening, thinking, visionary exercises, and concentrated skills as prime tools for tomorrow's person, for tomorrow's manager, tomorrow's priest, and tomorrow's politician. It is difficult to think and difficult to listen, yet very crucial. I recall a graduate seminar in which I participated when a bold professor asked us to retire to our dormitory rooms. He asked us to remain there and think. Within 5 minutes, some had already peeked out the door to see who else was peeking out. Because we had to be involved, we couldn't think. Today, the graduates deserve homage. But I'd like to say what the last speaker said, and that is, homage is due to the professors, the mentors, the parents, and even your classmates who helped pay in cash and in kind for this experience. They are the other half of the partnership. I believe that everything one does, including foreign policy, must have a philosophical basis and a philosophical underpinning. I am fond of saying that as thinking individuals or as members of an institution, in order to be successful, none of us can simply react to situations We really must meet challenges more than halfway. We must lead when we can. Our experiences shape us, but our own thinking about reality is transcendent to that reality. A 15th century Japanese philosopher, the samurai Musashi Miyamoto, held that by knowing things that exist, one can also know that which does not exist. I think he meant one must come to think in a wide sense, not be unnecessarily bound by the past, but never forget the past as wisdom. Everything I've said, I mean to fit within the current concepts of foreign policy and foreign affairs management. I see these philosophical concepts as easily applying to practical applications. I hope you will be motivated to be more curious about the world of foreign affairs. Constant dynamic changes in the foreign affairs arena require consideration of new ways to evaluate and manage mercurial situations on a daily basis. We are, of course, used to usual roles of traditional bilateral relations, but we are, in fact, behind the times because what we have been accustomed to doing has been dramatically augmented by constant additions to an already unruly universe. These include, from what appears to be a democratic groundswell around the world to the first serious arms reductions since the Kellogg-Briand Pact of the 20s, and on to international dimensions of the global environment, to institution-building concepts, to defining a new paradigm for a free market economy. We in the State Department are asking ourselves with uncommon regularity how we can meet these new challenges, these new realities. How do we create and develop a novel approach, signaling a new awareness of our universe of challenges? We have to bring this down to real terms. In the context of this talk today, I'd like to mention just two foreign policy areas: South Africa and Southern Africa, and the environment. I think that Southern Africa provides an example of both the dramatic changes occurring plus open-ended opportunities before our very eyes. The situation in the Republic of South Africa is perhaps like nothing we have experienced in that way. The South African government's 42-year-old institution of apartheid, of course, causes moral outrage and repugnance in the American people and in their government. Priority attention to backing and encouraging peaceful change there is one of our country's firm policies, recently reaffirmed. Our foreign policy towards South Africa has gone through many iterations since the Eisenhower administration. Now, our long-term national goals vis-à-vis South Africa include promoting political and economic freedom and democracy, respect for individual liberty, and basic human rights. This means eliminating apartheid and encouraging rapid movement to institution of a representative democratic government, which must come about through a consensus-developed constitution. It also means eliminating regional tension along the lines of our recent successful Namibian settlement. It means maintaining access to strategic minerals. However, let's discuss what I consider to be most important, and those are our principles. South African issues hit at the very core of our principles, and they include democratic ideals, pluralistic societal values, and the positive dynamism of the free market. Of course, we must be responsive to the interests of the significant number of Americans who trace their ancestry to the African continent. African economic potential and the American market make us an ideal partnership arrangement. So, considering our interests, you might well ask, how have we performed? Under the terms of the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act of 1986, we have access to strategic minerals. And also, through a combination of economic and diplomatic efforts, we have increasing degrees of influence and partnership arrangement with the nations in the region. Apartheid appears to be cracking. State President de Klerk seemingly has set a new and irrevocable course for his government. In the last few months, he has repeatedly said, and I quote, "We are on a course of action which cannot be reversed." Along with Nelson Mandela's release and the talks about talks between the African National Congress and the South African government, which happened earlier this month, that dynamically ended one era and began another. Though huge obstacles remain, Mandela and de Klerk appear to be working together to create a middle ground. Their coming visits to this country will be a reinforcement of that activity. Nelson Mandela appears to be a key South African leader who can go far to bring all factions together, black and white. We are encouraged, and we have noted Mandela's efforts to work with the PAC, the Young Comrades, and others, for example. De Klerk's steps of unbanning the ANC, restraining police violence, and his unequivocal stand that a change must take place does confuse many whites in South Africa. But I've said often that a precondition for a new South Africa is an Afrikaner who can stand up and say that he is an Afrikaner, but he's a South African first. De Klerk has an opportunity to be that person. The United States cannot afford to be other than involved continuously in South Africa in every way possible to work towards peaceful change. The future for South Africa is open-ended. It could lead, perhaps, for the first time, to a nation as envisioned by Alan Paton, that is a non-racial society with all citizens participating in what he called the beloved country. Regardless of who governs South Africa, we must assume that that country will have an unending effect on the rest of Southern Africa. We hope this influence will be positive in societal and economic arenas, as well as technological transfer and trade and societal development. This will help eliminate war, famine, and pestilence. To this scenario, the United States business acumen, our technology, and public administration expertise could well make major contributions. Some of the themes that you have just finished studying may well apply to that area. What might we predict for the future there? Clearly, observable progress towards a new political order, permitting all South Africans to have a voice in how they're governed, may signal reason to discuss the lifting of sanctions, working through a partnership with U.S. private sector activities, private volunteer organizations, and the United States government would act as a vehicle for the entire southern area. Clearly, I see a bright future for South Africa if de Klerk and Mandela continue their course of action. The environment, a second issue, is important. Environment-related foreign policy readily and open-endedly mixes non-traditional foreign affairs activities with domestic concerns. Intense domestic and international public interest and business interest in clean air or developments in Antarctica require novel, visionary approaches. This affects the global quality of life as well as it affects us directly as a people. Thus, we are forced to ask ourselves whether we can apply proactive environment-related theory as we come to grips with these problems in a global context. I think that we can. But I think we must accept that the time has passed when we, the United States, can act unilaterally. International agreements are the way we must approach protecting the global environment. Whether a country is a third or first world status, international cooperation, environmental protection, and economic growth must go hand in hand. This seemingly simple but often ignored approach is our model if we want to influence events and protect our national interest. Improved energy efficiency, for example, can lower costs and reduce greenhouse effect causing gases. We can certainly observe beneficial aspects of significant changes to national lifestyles, but the initial high cost already causes hesitation in implementing new environment-sensitive technologies. When nations see the inescapable link to emerging overall foreign policy paradigms, the real change will then occur. This may move slowly at first, but you can influence the process. But, to repeat, global environmental problems require concerted international action, with the more developed countries leading the way, meaning that developed and developing countries must work together to be truly effective. Productivity costs to both developed and developing nations will initially be high, but the returns will be even higher. The State Department is coordinating environmental activities and cooperation through a lot of agencies, including the Environmental Protection Agency and the Departments of Agriculture and Commerce. In the last 15 years, over 30 agreements have been negotiated on issues from geophysical research to the protection of individual plant species with other nations. Such agreements help guarantee the quality of life not only for the present, but also for the future. Pacts have been signed with nations like Canada, as well as new nations like Mali, as that nation begins to develop its own water resources. All of these concerns tie in very neatly with what we need to be doing. And finally, I'd like to just add that a new approach with the Soviet Union will lead to further protection of salmon fisheries and indeed the seas themselves. What we need and must have is a proactive paradigm which will lead us to effective international cooperation. As I conclude, I'd like to offer a few closing thoughts. I think by all that I've said, you can see that I'm trying to say that whether you're in academia or in practical professional endeavors, such as foreign affairs, the learning process is a constant. Whether you wish it or not, foreign policies affect all of us. Those who manage must continue to be representative of the best and brightest that our country can produce. But we must also be representative of what our country stands for. In practical terms, that means a healthy representation of women and minorities. Just as important, the entire citizenry must be conscious of what foreign policy is emerging. Mortimer Adler urges that we move repeatedly between the academic and professional worlds. This has, I believe, considerably widened my own intellectual and practical horizons, being reinforced over and over. I commend this same approach to all of you. Combine the theoretical and practical experiences with an open mind to maintain and strengthen your flexibility and your adaptability. The new graduates are prime targets to continue to develop new skills and knowledges and to open-endedly adapt the results into your work as well as your lives, thus meeting Samurai Musashi's dicta, to know all. I offer you good luck as you continue your lifetime of learning.
Now we will pause before the conferral of degrees to hear the senior ensemble, the senior members of the men's chorus, sing the traditional student song, Gaudeamus Igitur, in an arrangement by Dr. Axel Timer, longtime director of the men's chorus and other choral groups at St. John's. We've carefully left the text of this song in Latin and have not said where it was traditional.
Well, gentlemen, your moment has arrived. Will the candidates for the degrees of Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science please rise? Father Hillary, I present the candidates for the degrees of Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Science who have been approved by the faculty of the university.
By virtue of the authority committed to me, I confer upon you the degrees of Bachelor of Science and Bachelor of Arts, which have been approved by the faculty of the university and for which you have been recommended. The Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences will please have the candidates come forward.
The degree Bachelor of Arts, Egregia Cum Laude, is conferred upon Thomas David Braun. The degree Bachelor of Science, Summa Cum Laude, is conferred upon Michael David Haney. Daniel Albright. The degree Bachelor of Arts, Summa Cum Laude, is conferred upon Paul Francis Rebay, Christopher Allen Ratzloff, Paul David Mayer, Stuart Mitchell Cron. The degree Bachelor of Science, Magna Cum Laude, is conferred upon Brian Dennis Ervig, Raymond J. Kenny, Stephen Morris Nowak, Colin John Kromke, Teddy John Doyle, Brendan William Vanderhagen, Kingsley Livingston Black, Daniel Lauren Cole, Jeffrey Scott Betts, Kelvin K. Yu, Mark Allen Schweiss, Bradley Joseph Poppin. The degree Bachelor of Arts, Magna Cum Laude, is conferred upon Vincent Theodore Skemp, Leonard Joseph Fierst, Anthony Joseph Collins, Scott Charles Labar, Bradley Michael Rink, Glenn Skuta, Jack Patrick Swearingen. The degree Bachelor of Science, Cum Laude, is conferred upon Timothy Arthur Myers, Michael Patrick Presseler, Daniel James Fanoof, William Joseph Betton, Michael Bradley Hebert, Bruce Francis Jensen, Andrew John Will, Stephen Michael Benson, Kirk Michael Fisher, Edward Roger Friesen. The degree Bachelor of Arts Cum Laude is conferred upon David Duncan Burbidge, Alan Andrew McWilliams, Joseph Clarence Lane, Michael James Gross. The degree Bachelor of Science is conferred upon Brett Charles Haberstick, Mark Joseph Lang, Gregory Donald Santer, James Patrick Brattensburg, Ronald Mark Lutmer, Todd Allen Porter, Keith Randall Lynch, Matthew Lee Maratska, Craig Lawrence Harold, Brian R. Kempkin, James Thomas J. Steck, Jr., Patrick Gerard Redden, Thomas Gerard Kavanaugh, Mark Chernus, Craig Lynn Gibbs, John Ritchie, Paul Anthony Kozlowska, Scott William Vandeputty, Thomas Norton, Thomas Charles St. Angelo, Leon Dupuche, Jeffrey John Hansen, Jason Charles Oman, David J. Faust, Mark William Schwieters, Mark Gregory Panion, Jeffrey Todd Walsh, David Lawrence Voller, John Kaler, Tyler Bergine, Kevin Francis Burke, Thomas Arthur Habstritt, Patrick Sean Duffy, Brett Robert Loeb, John Michael Jerabek, Michael Todd Ulrich, Gregory David Rudrud, Daniel James Ostgard, Robert Charles Bikes, Timothy John Grudel, Chris Delwo, James Dale Wolford, David William McDonnell, Thomas Allen Von Eschen, Curtis Edward Hoffman, Mark Andrew Scherer, Craig William Junker, Robert James Zabel, Timothy Allen Stoffel, John Leonard Duffy, William Wilson Kennedy, Timothy L. Marshall, Brian Michael Bagan, John David Furlock, David Eichhoff, Thomas Schlater, Eric Hansen, Christopher John Doman, David Patrick Langer, Aaron Cruz Choquette, Brian Stark, Gregory James Miller, Mark Walter Baker, Brian James Leary, Timothy Joseph Conyard, William Joseph Griffin, Todd Christopher Schlorf, Ted Matthew Milner, Derek Russell Clements, Joseph Michael Dahl, Gregory James Ludke, Todd Michael Stoffel, Scott Retzlaff, Sean Rotink, James S. Urick, Edward Carl Pfeiffer, John Patrick McGarry, Thomas McMahon Schlehuber, Jeffrey Almond, Michael Joseph Kennedy, Eric George Boyer, Eric J. Treadle, Thomas Robert Reuter, James Chihak, David Stephen Sabula, Patrick Davich, Thomas Wayne Zozel, John David Nowak, Leonard Gerard Mager, Paul Evan Rangloff, Thomas Primesberger, Todd Michael Vandehei, Jason Zakchevsky, Thomas Boitz, Roger Allen Gamble, Michael Dale Tollefson, John J. Wackman, Michael M. Lefebvre, Paul Joseph Kenny, Peter John Bergner, Paul Michael Morin, Eric William Snap, Casey Robert O'Keefe, Patrick J. Page, Paresh J. Patel, Kevin Hilger, John Cutter, Chad Christopher Hemstad, John Andrew Heller, James Richard Casey, Michael Francis Phippen, Alan Joseph Spaulding, Philip Edward Postlethwaite, Donald Wayne Savukul, Maury Patrick O'Brien, Michael John Elison, Darren Bruce Dressen, Lee Andrew Lastovich, Keith D. Sumi, Gabriel John Flynn, Brian Frank Bolig, Christopher Carl Baker, Patrick Michael Lade, Michael John Cunningham, Nate Kong Vo, Michael Thomas Latska, Michael James Morell, Thomas J. Zwilling, Michael Edward Turnquist, Kevin James Kelly, David V. Gillespie, John Richard Wentz, John Charles Kunkel, Randall Benson, Bradley Allen Johannes, Scott Allen Sayert, Patrick Dreisenter, John Michael Kimlinger, Robin Ebnett, Brian Joseph Hennessy, Donald Allen Krieger, Joseph Timothy Stika, Michael Stephen Kunerth, Patrick William Turley, John Thomas Peichel, Michael Gerard Kelly, Lawrence Edward Jurek, Michael Patrick Malone, Timothy Scott Neese, Christopher Nalesny, Todd William Streed, Daniel Bottiger, T.J. Bauer, Joseph Lee Wire, Mark William Palmer, Jeffrey Mark Kramer, James Anthony Mahold, Matthew Alfred Knight, Troy Darren DeRocher, Anthony Douglas Baker, Bob Legering, Frank John Emanuelson, Jarrett Christian Daniels, Donald John Chadwick II, Dean Allen Rodemacher, Eric Joseph Munschauer, Sean Joseph Luer, Arnold Jerome Schrammel, Randy Wilbert Pauley, Paul John Kelfgen, Dennis James Bodigheimer, Charles John Miller, Bernard Charles Cockton Jr., James Robert Nettleton, Timothy Aaron Olkey, Brett Eric Turnquist, Jamie Albert Bensmiller, Paul Robinette, James George Hayjack, Kevin John Hansen, Christopher Patrick Kirkberg, John Thomas Havelka, Curtis H. Van Hefty, Dean Edward Simon, Edward G. White, Michael Paul Ramler, Michael Alfred Morey, Jeffrey Randall Olenek, Thomas Patrick Murphy, Ross A. Otto, Michael J. Mills, Kelly Daniel Murta, Mark W. Heinzig, Kevin Kuznia, Kenneth Daughters, Stanley Alexander Kulosky I, Michael A. Kruger, Michael Magnuson, Jeffrey Boyle, Jonathan Lillimon, Todd Michael Dugan, John Edward Cole, Thomas Charles Wicca, Daniel Peter Redpath, Paul Francis Commerce, Mark Patrick Baskfield, William Michael Fitzgerald. The degree Bachelor of Arts is conferred upon Michael W. Foster, Robert John Green, John Carl Wilwerding, Jeffrey Andrew Bilek, Stephen George Amble, Christopher Robert Boytz, Stephen Michael Sanjak, Gregory Dwayne Carter, Nick Thomas Ridgway, William R. Kundinger Jr., Todd M. Zabzalka, Richard Luke Toft, Von Ken Thill, Patrick Maltby Galvin, Patrick Gerald Doran, David William Briggs, Jeffrey Peichel, Edward J. Lamb, Christopher John Getteman, Timothy Paul Coy, John Joseph Killian, James Philip Von House, Keith Vowles, Peter Lowell Schuster, Aaron R. Bjerke, Michael McElroy, Christopher James Laird, Kenneth Lee Winter, John Anthony Boucher, Ross Cameron Scott, Michael James Budka, Victor S. Cooper, John Thomas Colwell, Nathan John James Lindsley, Robert John Sitar, Craig Robert Runquist, Mark Joseph Gross, Kevin John Russell, Vang Vang, Paul Edmund Jasinski, Eric Ilko Stefanishin, Michael John Schaefer, Gregory Fitzgerald Fugate, David Michael Cartier, Mark Douglas Bortscheller, James David Romer, Robert Timothy Speltz, Jeffrey Nicholas Licht, Brian Glenn Ashman, Stephen Charles Murphy, David Wareham, Jeffrey William Nelson, Timothy Allen Gilbert, Stephen John Beam, Jan Whitehill, Joel Edmund Lakin, Joseph John Witt, Patrick Lawrence Germscheid, Brett Thomas Bogart, Joseph Frank Cook, Daniel Leonard, Patrick O'Shea, John Carlton Pearson, Scott Leonard Seraphin, James C. Lofgren, Michael Thomas Lee, Kurt Michael Anderson, Lucas John Scardigli, Stephen A. Varley, Richard Coughlin, David Adam Sundberg, Anthony Stephen LaPonta, Mark Biskin, Justin McCarthy, Mike Simonet, Vincent Wynn Moga, Brian Keith Kuntz Jr., Joseph Cleveland, David C. Runquist, David McChula, Jeffrey Ronald Vessel, James Bernard Kenny Jr., Stephen Timothy Dornbach, Thomas John Theobald, Daniel David Bastian, Terry Patrick Bodensteiner, Timothy James Poncho, Peter James Amon, Patrick Ryan O'Gorman, Mark Frederick Sullivan, David Anthony Falzone, William Francis Lewis, Gregory Joseph Conrad, Peter Timothy Schmelzer, Michael Joseph Stanky, Mark Perrone, Michael Kowalska, John Norbert Herbeck, Matthew John Keeler, Gregory Goyle, Adam Tebbett, Raymond Alec Knight, Gerald Francis Begley, Patrick Daniel Gross, Keith Stephen Peterson, David Michael Kuntz, Kevin David Cunningham, Gary Francis Sofio, Michael David Nicholson.
Will the candidates for the degrees of Master of Arts, Master of Divinity, and Master of Theological Studies please rise? Father Hilary, I present the candidates for the degrees of Master of Arts, Master of Divinity, and Master of Theological Studies which have been approved by the faculty of the university.
By virtue of the authority committed to me, I confer upon you the degrees of Master of Arts, Master of Divinity, and Master of Theological Studies, which have been approved by the faculty of the university and for which you have been recommended. The Dean of the School of Theology will please have the candidates come forward.
The degree of Master of Arts in Theology is conferred upon Sister Maureen Dolores Didier, Mary A. Ale, Louis Luke Soika of the Order of St. Benedict, the degree of Master of Divinity is conferred upon David John Baumgartner, Cyril Anthony Gorman of the Order of St. Benedict, Thomas J. Halston of the Order of St. Benedict, who has also earned a Master of Arts in Theology, Daniel Patrick McCarthy of the Order of St. Benedict, Justin Elliott Needham of the Order of St. Benedict, Michael Francis Patella of the Order of St. Benedict, Jan Joseph Santich of the Order of St. Benedict, Roger Jacob Tennis, Daniel Leonard Torson of the Society of Precious Blood, the degree of Master of Theological Studies is conferred upon Peter Thomas Nord.
Let's now stand and sing From All That Dwell Below the Skies.
We thank you, Lord, for the many labors and sacrifices of parents, relatives, and friends who have brought us to this point in our lives. We thank you for the gifts of peace and hope. We ask that you be with us always as we struggle to be of service to you and the human community, you who live forever and ever. Amen.